Committee will now resume, and I welcome the CSIRO. Dr Marshall, welcome. Do you wish to make an opening statement?
I do, thank you, Chair.
Please.
Dr Larry Marshall, Chief Executive, CSIRO. Look, given everything that's happened this year, I thought it'd be useful to provide the committee with just some brief information, particularly on COVID-19 and bushfires, two issues which have gripped Australia in 2020 and seen our scientists further galvanised to use science to help keep Australia safe. To understand the virus and combat it, CSIRO scientists tested two vaccine candidates selected by the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, who we partnered with 18 months ago to prepare for just such a situation. And that work enabled the acceleration of the first phase 3 human trials for a COVID vaccine. We also used our state-of-the-art biologics production facility in Melbourne to scale up and purify the University of Queensland's vaccine candidate so it too could be used in clinical trials. To help understand the virus, we've analysed its longevity on different surfaces and tracked the emergence of different strains to ensure the effectiveness of vaccine candidates. Both of these are critical to continuing to inform the best public health response. To protect the public and support our businesses, we developed with UQ wastewater testing to pinpoint outbreaks in the community, on aircraft and at major sporting events. By arming our states and territories with data and data analytics, we're helping them to understand and isolate hotspots so that state borders can be opened, people can be reunited with their loved ones, and the economy can get back on track. We worked with industry to overcome shortages of critical protective equipment for frontline health workers and established Australia's first NATA-accredited face mask testing facility run by the CSIRO to ensure Australians get the very best protection. The fight against COVID-19 isn't over, but this committee can rest assured that their national science agency will not rest until it is truly over. But we won't rest for long because there are other battles for us to fight. As we head into bushfire season again, we'll once again draw on 70 years of experience to inform the government's response, working closely with Australia's brave firefighters, fire authorities, our university partners, and of course impacted communities. Australian science, once again, will be on the shoulders and in the pockets of every firefighter, keeping them one step ahead of bushfires when they inevitably do break out. While COVID-19 and bushfires have been devastating, they've also brought out the best in Team Australia, driving unprecedented collaboration to fight a common foe. The collaboration will continue as we look to overcome the seemingly insurmountable challenges that we still face across our environment, food security and quality, health and well-being, our future industries, energy and our national security. Large, complex problems that can only be tackled by coming together in a true Team Australia approach, which we're developing right now in the shape of a missions program, along with universities, industry and the community. 12 very specific missions to build resilience and recovery in the face of this adversity. Business has undoubtedly suffered greatly this year, and as they look to find the green shoots of recovery, we'll be right there with them to ensure science and technology really delivers for them, working together, turning science into solutions for businesses both large and small. Aussie ingenuity is creating manufacturing wonders that will create jobs and advantages for Australia. And finally, the government's $459 million funding commitment will address the impact of COVID-19 on our commercial activities and ensure our financial stability to allow us to continue to deliver all of the critical science to support the nation as we grow back our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr Marshall, and thank you for CSIRO's critical work in the COVID fight. Senator Roberts, you have the call. I've also got indications from Senator Pratt and Senator Rice.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here today. My questions, Chair, were sent in advance about 2 weeks ago, a little bit under 2 weeks ago, and deal with past presentations by CSIRO. And so my first question is that, as I said in the letter, number one, do you stand by CSIRO's implied claim that Marcotte and Le Cavalier are the best evidence CSIRO has for showing that the rate of temperature change today is unprecedented in the last 10,000 years?
I'll just very briefly intercede there, Senator Roberts, because there's obviously been an exchange of correspondence here. You've written to CSIRO and I've just received a copy of their response to you. Dr Marshall,
I haven't seen CSIRO.
I think it's just about to be circulated to the committee. Dr Marshall, were you intending for that to be tabled by the committee?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well then, in that case, we'll circulate copies to committee members for tabling. Sorry, Senator Roberts.
No, Dr. Marshall was about to answer.
And Senator, I'll let Dr Mayfield answer the detail of your question.
So, Dr. Peter Mayfield, Executive Director for Environment, Energy and Resources. So, Senator, yes, we have prepared a response to the letter that you sent us. I do have copies of that here, and an electronic copy was provided to the Secretary. So, there's an opportunity to sort of look at our response in detail. In regard to Marcotte, yes, we do stand by the conclusions of that paper.
Stand by Marcotte.
Yes.
Okay. And what about Le Cavalier?
Yes, both papers.
Le Cavalier
we believe
too.
the best evidence.
Okay.
So-
Thank you. That's good. Why did second question? What did CSIRO rely on before Marcotte 2013? Say in the 1980s, when Bob Hawke was the first Prime Minister to raise the issue of anthropogenic climate change, said to be due to carbon dioxide from human activity.
So, Senator, so the state of the science in the Australian context has been provided by the volume Greenhouse Planning for the Future, which is published by CSIRO in 1988 and is still available. And it was already very evident in the 1980s that anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide were altering the chemistry of the atmosphere.
Excuse me, the chemistry of the atmosphere, but not the temperature of the Earth?
Chemistry of the atmosphere is at that point in time, and temperature record was also changing.
Okay, thank you. Third question. At what stage did CSIRO start giving significant advice to governments on anthropogenic climate change?
So CSIRO has been providing advice to government in relation to greenhouse matters for more than 60 years. So it's been a long history of us providing advice in this area.
Thank you. Then I had my fourth question was to Dr. Mayfield. I need Dr. Mayfield to specify one, the slides and specific, a slide or slides and specific data to which he refers and on which his answer relies when I asked my previous question, which you're familiar with, Dr. Mayfield.
So, Senator, we've provided the details many times to you. You'd appreciate that in each of these papers, which have been published by peer review, the analysis around statistical substance of the various measurements.
No, I'm not going to let you off the hook. That's a dodging of the question. The question is, to which of the specific slides or specific data in the presentations do you refer to when you stood up last time, Senator Estimates, and said, it's in the presentations? Which of the slides, I want to know specifically, contain the statistical analysis that proves that carbon dioxide from human activity has that there is a change in the climate, in any factor of climate?
So, as you're aware, Senator, there's a number of papers, multiple lines of
No.
evidence around...
I'm asking you for the specific slide and the specific data to which you refer. I'm not going to take any more of this vague nonsense.
So
I want the specific slide, specific data.
In the slides, you'll see
can't
there's
do
a
it?
number of different references. Obviously, we work with the work of Marcotte. More recently, there's the work of that's coming from. Just bear with me for a second. Kaufman, sorry.
How do you spell that?
So it's Kaufmann.
Okay.
So it's a paper that's been produced in 2020, which also undertakes an analysis of a wide range of methodologies, looking at both the
2020.
historical record and the current record of temperature change.
So I asked you on Thursday, the 24th of October 2019, a year ago, to provide empirical scientific evidence that shows, quote, statistically significant variation that proves there has been a process change. That is variation that is beyond or outside natural, inherent, cyclical or seasonal variation over the last 350 years. You stood up and said, it's in here, we've given it to you. That is not correct. I want to know specifically what the data is in those presentations that,
So,
that
Senator,
indicate statistically
we've provided
significant
you
change.
with a number of references. Those are the references that we believe
I
show
want to
that.
know where...
You don't agree with us, but that's what we believe.
You have never presented, CSIRO has never presented any response to that question, because the first time that question was asked was in the Senate estimates last year. CSIRO has never addressed that question. Your statement is false, if that's what you're implying.
That's incorrect, Senator. The data is in the papers that we refer to.
I said show
Part of
me
those
where the
pulling that
statistically
science
significant-
together is about
Dr.
undertaking that
Mayfield-
sort of statistical
sorry, Dr.
analysis
Mayfield, I'll
so
just
that you show
briefly
meaningful trend.
intercede here. Senator Roberts, could I ask that you allow the witnesses an opportunity to finish their answers to your questions before you interject or ask a
Chair.
follow-up question?
Chair, he's not answering the question.
Well, Senator Roberts, you may be unsatisfied with the answer that he's giving, but that doesn't give you a right to interrupt him. You have to allow witnesses to conclude their answers, and then you can ask a follow-up question to challenge that answer if you wish.
So as I said, Senator, those various papers, part of doing peer review process, you go through the statistical analysis, you show what is a meaningful trend versus what is not a meaningful trend due to the uncertainty in those measurements. And we stand by those papers and those measurements and those peer review processes.
I want on record that never has CSIRO in any of their presentations to me made any reference, any statement about statistically significant variation in climate. Not at all. I asked it for the first time this time last year.
You could ask CSIRO to read the paper to you.
Senator
Yeah.
Pratt probably
Could you specify the
But
paper?
let's not-
Could you
I've already
specify the
specified
paper?
the papers. So
The exact papers. Because
So-
you have never referenced them in any way in any of the
Okay.
presentations. So I want to know the specific papers.
we've given you the papers, Senator.
Which ones?
So it's Marcotte, it's Le Cavalier, and more recently
Okay, so let's go
Kaufman.
on to the second part. Now that you've come on that, specify the statistical analysis techniques that were used.
So, Senator, there's many techniques that are used. There's thousands of papers.
No, the ones that you rely upon to make the statement that
Many
there is a
techniques
statistical
So that's-
significant change.
Please.
I want to know the specific ones.
Well, that's part of the peer review process that's undertaken for each of these papers, Senator. So if you choose to talk
right,
to the
thank you.
authors, they'll be able to talk you through their specific work.
We contacted the author of Le Cavalier, which you recommended, and he will not divulge his information. That's what
can't-
you rely upon, people who do not divulge their information. So let's go to the third one then. The relevant statistical levels of confidence from the analysis of the climate factor that you've identified. So what is the level of confidence in the analysis?
So, Senator, again, I've just referred to my previous answers.
Thank you. Could you specify the time interval of data for which the statistical analysis was applied?
Senator, I can't answer that question. It's a question that should be directed towards the author of the paper.
Thank you. Question 5.
Very much a detail, sir.
Yes, it certainly is.
Senator Roberts, I might have been remiss last time. I think I promised to send you a copy of this, and I don't know if I did or not, if my office did, but if not,
No,
I
you
brought a
didn't.
copy and I'll leave this here with you. It does have a map of the projections for temperature.
No, I'm after empirical scientific evidence. That's what I've been through
It's-
all the way along.
It's based
Not the
on
projections.
It's based on data since 1950 and successfully predicting.
I want to know
last
statistically
20 years of
significant
data.
change, Dr. Marshall.
Well, I think you'll get it from here and the references here in Senator, but I'll
Thank
give you this
you.
to you if I can. That'll
Thank you.
hopefully be
Good.
helpful.
Now, Dr. Marshall, I also said in my letter that I hope you agree that the only valid analysis for such policies, climate change and supporting of renewable subsidies, is specific empirical scientific evidence with a logic proving causation and quantifying the effect of carbon dioxide from human activity on climate factors such as atmospheric temperatures. I hope you understand the need to justify such policies on solid scientific evidence quantifying cause and effect. Such quantified evidence is needed to implement such policies and to monitor the effect of such policies. Without the specific quantified relationship between human carbon dioxide output and climate factors, it is not possible to do cost-benefit cases nor track progress. So my question to you, number 5, was, if you disagree with this reasoning, please provide me with what you see as the alternative basis for policy.
So, Senator, we base our work on the measured changes in climate since about 1950. We have, for example, directly intervened by breeding different strains of wheat to prevent the wheat yield from going down because we don't want the impact of drought or increased temperatures or shifts in rainfall to reduce the productivity of Australia's wheat industry. So we have data since 1950 that shows these effects are happening. We know that the nation has become drier in the south, wetter in the north, and we know that the temperature has come up. That's not projections, they've been measured. But because we've known that, because we predicted that some years ago, some decades ago, we're able to successfully intervene to help industry navigate those changes without a loss in their profitability. And that's why we do the modelling. Senator, to try and understand how to help industry navigate changes in our
So
environment.
let me put it bluntly. Do you or do you not believe that policy should be based on a quantified, specified relationship between cause and effect? In other words, this much carbon dioxide with the amount specified leading to this much temperature change.
Senator, I think policy should be based on the best science available, and it should be data-driven. Data-driven. And I've just given you the data that drove
you
us to
haven't
make
given
the
me the data.
interventions.
You've
Senator,
talked about having the
in
data.
here. It's also
So
in the state of the
do
climate.
you agree or not that policy should be driven by specified, quantified relationships between cause and effect?
I think policy should be data-driven, and it should be monitored and measured and evaluated using data.
Okay, thank you.
So, Senator, if I can add to that. So science, peer-reviewed science does provide that foundation on which policy can be built. In terms of the papers that we've talked to you about, we note that there's been at least 265 other papers which have referenced Marcotte as part of the peer review process, and to date no one has come up with an argument that says that paper is not valid. So the peer review process is at play there and has basically reinforced that paper is correct.
Marcotte himself said that the 20th century temperatures on which you're relying are not robust. Marcotte himself. So much for peer review.
Disagree with your
So
statement
let's
there,
move on to
Senator.
question 6. Australia has already done much to destroy its energy grid, yet as an overseer of taxpayers' funds, taxpayers' resources, I need to know whether this has shown up in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, and if so, how has it shown up and to what extent? Please provide empirical scientific evidence on the effect of carbon dioxide levels and temperatures from Australia's cuts to human carbon dioxide output. In other words, all the pain we're going through economically, where is it showing up in the global carbon dioxide levels?
So, Senator, as I think you and I have discussed before, Australia is barely 1%, 1.2 or 1.3% of the world's emissions. Therefore, any direct changes we make in this country are unlikely to have any impact on the global levels of
So
carbon
we're not going to
dioxide.
have any impact on the temperature then?
Well, 1.3% impact. Senator, however, our science can have an impact. For example, Future Feed, which has solved what seemingly was an impossible problem,
I
how
want
to
to know the
reduce the
impact of
emissions from
Australia's
cattle.
carbon dioxide payment, because people are paying an extra $1,300 per household, Dr. Marshall. On your salary, that's trivial. But on someone on the median income of $49,000, that is painful, extremely painful. Dan McDonald, a farmer in Queensland, and many farmers have lost the rights to use their property because of policies enacted by this government and previous governments. On $800,000, that's easy for you to wade through. But these people are suffering.
Senator, I'm not sure I understand your question here. Are you saying that there's some connection between things that CSIRO has done and these people suffering?
Your
Because I'm very
advice,
concerned
your
if that's the
advice
case.
has been cited by many ministers, both Labor and Liberal National, for the painful impositions of policies on our country. And people are paying for that through the hip pocket and through the loss of their rights to use their property that they own and have paid for. Your policy, your so-called support, according to ministers, is the reason for that. And I'm not getting evidence of quantified impact of our carbon dioxide. And you've just said you can't see any evidence in the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere because of Australia's carbon dioxide cuts.
Senator, I've just said that Australia has a relatively small direct impact on the carbon dioxide levels because
Can you
we're
show me the
small.
evidence that says we are reducing carbon dioxide levels
The evidence,
in the atmosphere?
the evidence that Australia is reducing.
Australia's impacts on energy, on agriculture,
So
are
that's-
resulting in a reduced temperature, reduced levels of carbon dioxide.
So the reduction in emissions has been reported by the Department of the Environment. So that would be a question for them, Senator.
You just answered my question.
Senator,
Thank you very much.
If I could add to that as well. So global CO2 levels are measured through the Global Carbon Project, which works from data
In
from
part
all
they're
three-
measured, in part they're
Senator
residuals.
Roberts.
So my last
But-
question, have global attempts, so we forget about Australia's little minuscule contribution, have global attempts to cut human production of carbon dioxide shown up in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, and if so, and to what extent?
So again, Senator, the Global Carbon Project measures or captures the
Didn't answer
the
my
various,
question,
the
Dr.
various
Mayfield.
emissions that are made
Roberts,
around the
give
globe,
them some time.
and that is the numbers that have been captured when they show that emissions are increasing.
Chair, when someone's asked a question and they say something but don't answer the question, That is not answering the question.
Order, Senator Roberts. Senator Roberts, in that case, Dr Mayfield would have been 5 to 10 seconds into his answer, so it's pretty early to form a strong view about what he was going to give you.
I must admit...
Senator Roberts, I don't seek to dictate how you ask your questions or what questions you ask, but only that you show courtesy to officials so they can answer your questions to the best of their abilities.
With respect, Chair, I deserve the respect of being answered properly when I'm asking questions on behalf of my constituents who are going through a lot of pain.
Senator Roberts, if you're not satisfied with the answers that you receive, please ask another follow-up question, but don't interrupt officials in the middle of their answers.
I'll ask it again. Have global attempts to cut human production of carbon dioxide shown up in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, and if so, how and to what extent?
So, Senator, in terms of the emissions being made, whether there's attempts to cut them or whether that's how they are naturally, they are captured through the Global Carbon Project. That's the accounting process that's worked to do that, and that shows that emissions overall are still increasing.
How emissions are still increasing? We've just been
Globally.
through a COVID depression, and we've just been through 2009. We had lower use of carbon dioxide than in 2008 in the recession that was global except for Australia. And in both cases, the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have continued to rise, despite human production falling dramatically, especially in the last 9 months. And yet you're telling me you can see it? They're going up, Dr Mayfield. So I'll ask again for the third time, then I'll leave it. Have global attempts to cut human production of carbon dioxide, particularly in the recession that was in 2009 when global production of carbon dioxide from human activity decreased and have decreased considerably in the last 7 months, shown up in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, and if so, how and to what extent? Please answer how they show up and to what extent.
So, Senator, the measure is the CO2 signal that's in the atmosphere. It's a well-mixed system, so it's represented well across the globe. If you want to refer to periods like 2009, which is at the end of the global financial crisis, there were slight changes in the rate of climb of these measurements. So you can see inflections like that. I don't have the details on the specific numbers and how that changed, but there are inflection points. But in terms of the longer term trend, it's still on the up.
Could you please send me the inflection points? I want to see the data, please, because from what I've seen of global atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, they've continued to rise relentlessly, despite no inflection whatsoever. So I'd like to see the inflection points. I'd like to see how much, and I'd like to see when.
So, Senator,
is that clear? How much and when? Is that clear, Dr Mayfield?
So what we'll provide you with is the Cape Grim record, which is the continuous record of CO2 content in the atmosphere.
That's CO2 at Cape Grim. Could you give me the global?
So as I said, CO2 is a gas that mixes well across the globe. There is minor variations, but overall there's a very good indication of the time series of the CO2 measurement.
Could you show me the global levels? I want to know how much it's changed and when.
As I said before, Senator, that work is done periodically through the Global Carbon Project. They report annually. We will provide you with some of that work as well as the Cape Grim measurements.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. I'll go to Senator Pratt and then Senator Rice.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good afternoon, Dr Marshall, and to your CSIRO colleagues. Can I ask when CSIRO first became aware of the potential impact of COVID-19?
When we first became aware, Senator...
Well, I know you would have been across pandemics and COVID-like viruses, but in terms of the assessment of the potential impact of COVID-19?
Yeah, Senator, I think we were in the same boat as most of the rest of us. We were watching it emerge, but February, March timeframe probably.
But you also do other work on pandemics that mean you're alert to these things, I'm sure. Can I ask, did you brief the Prime Minister or any government ministers about the potential impact? If so, when and what was the nature of that advice?
I don't think it's appropriate for me to discuss a conversation with a minister, but as far as briefing, we have regular briefings with our minister that cover everything from the state of manufacturing, the innovation issues in the economy, and those normal briefings would have included anything that we saw related to COVID. The government itself, though, partnered with CSIRO, so they would have had access to that information through CSIRO as well as through us.
Through,
Might I add to that for you as well, Senator? So Judy Zelke, Chief Operating Officer. Just to give examples of what Dr Marshall was talking about, we of course have been inputting to information being provided by other departments to ministers as well as providing advice directly. So we've been engaging with the Department of Health, the Department of Industry, in particular in relation to COVID since early days, noting that even the Department of Home Affairs and Department of Agriculture have been involved in that as well. So they've been seeking our advice and input in relation to those two provide to ministers, in addition to what Dr Marshall referenced.
okay, and while I don't want to impinge on, of course, conversations, but clearly, as an independent organisation, you give advice not only to government but to many other organisations around the country. What kind of advice have you been giving in relation to COVID?
Senator, we've published a number of peer-reviewed papers on the impacts of COVID, its longevity on different surfaces, the different strains of the virus. I believe there are a number of papers still yet to come out through peer review on the vaccine candidate testing. But in general, we would help any organisation that asked for help in navigating this, whether it was sharing how we protect our people through social distancing, how we manage to stand up digital capabilities so that they could work from home. Naturally, many of our people couldn't work from home because they do work in labs, so we had to thin out the sites to make it safe for those that needed to be there to continue their important work. So just in general, anything, or indeed helping manufacturers figure out how to make personal protective equipment and so on.
Have you increased your commitment and workload to areas devoted across the spectrum, whether it's manufacturing or research in relation to COVID? I know you will have. Are you able to quantify that for us at all?
I can.
Yeah, sure.
Senator, I have some numbers in relation to our work with businesses in particular in that regard. So as at the end of September, we've responded to inquiries from industry, 1,283 inquiries as at the end of September, and as a result of that we've proceeded with providing advice, but in addition are working with 52 companies in relation to direct projects in that regard. And they sit across a range of areas, PE, as was mentioned, but also diagnostics and antiviral and therapeutic testing areas as well.
Thank you. I'll just now briefly ask about the ASL cap being lifted for CSIRO. By how much has it been lifted, and was that a result of the request from CSIRO? I know we've had some debate about this cap in the past, and you've been very diplomatic about it, Dr Marshall, but can I ask how much has the cap now lifted? What was it before and what is it now?
So, Senator, the cap in the budget was raised by 101 positions. 100 of those were provided to give CSIRO additional flexibility in relation to undertaking its science work, and there was one ASL that was provided specifically for the consumer data rights work.
Can I ask, is that what CSIRO requested, and what prompted the request?
Senator, as you know from previous conversations, we've been speaking with the Department of Finance and through that to providing advice to the Finance Minister. The 100 was provided in response to those questions. We didn't submit a specific figure.
Okay, you didn't submit a specific figure, but you must have had some discussions. How was the 100 arrived at? We know what the 1 was for. How was 100 arrived at?
Senator, that would be a question specifically for Department of Finance, the Minister for Finance, who has approved it. I can surmise, though, that we finished the year under on our ASL, I think the extra 100 will provide us with the flexibility that we need to continue to bring new researchers in whilst we have continuing projects finishing up.
Okay, so just
that transition period.
If you can, you've started going to what I next wanted to ask was how do you intend to utilise these additional ASL?
So, Senator, we expect that we'll continue with the same process we have at the moment, making sure that when we have a position available or a need to fill a position, that we're looking at what that need is, where can we best get the capability, and therefore take a decision in relation to how best to achieve that. An example might be postdocs coming in to undertake periods of research work over 2 to 3 years, or permanent positions for senior researchers to come into the organisation on a permanent basis, or, for example, an admin role that requires somebody for 3 months. So we'll continue with that same process.
I know in the past you've had postdocs that have kind of remained umbrellaed by the university because of the funding,
Or because of
ASL cap, or
sorry,
because
Senator.
of other things. But so where does the improvement come? It means that you can offer more permanent positions and you can look at the best fit.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. What types of positions will increase most? Scientists, engineers, lab technicians, support staff?
I don't know that I can answer that question specifically. We had towards the end of last financial year, prior to 30 June this year, we had a large number of our projects come to an end. At the moment we have a number of new projects starting in that regard. So I would expect the majority would be used in relation to our science efforts, Senator, which is the norm in relation to it. The majority of our people are scientists or engineers in relation to that work.
And are you looking to more growth in early career positions, mid-career or senior? Or is that going to depend? I might be asking the questions about the roles when actually I could be asking you what kind of research projects you want to take on, and then that will dictate those answers. Can I ask how far you are through making decisions about what's going to come into CSIRO in terms of those new projects, and I guess what kind of job security, etc. And are you, there'll be areas of research where it's important to promote early career positions. How are you weighing up those kinds of things?
So, Senator, there's a number of ways we engage our people, and CSIRO's team is not just the 5,000 to 5,500 people who are actually on our payroll. It's a little over 8,000 people altogether, a lot of whom are joint appointments with universities, partners that work part-time in a university, part-time in CSIRO, students, postdocs, and various types of affiliates. And that was a very deliberate decision back in the start of Strategy 2020. We had a pillar called collaboration, and our aspirational goal was to try and have, at some point in the future, maybe as much as 30% of our workforce actually in other institutions. The reason for that is, Senator, Australia is the lowest collaborating nation in the OECD, and we wanted to try and do something to stimulate that. Little did we know that a crisis like COVID was a way to stimulate collaboration probably faster than we were able to. And in terms of the areas that we'll focus on, just about every business in the country has been damaged pretty badly by the crisis and the resulting recession. So a lot of our energy is going into figuring out how to help these businesses rebuild and see if they can become more efficient, more productive, more innovative using leveraging Australian science and technology. So in particular, the manufacturing strategy is a great opportunity to do that in Australia's strong areas like agriculture and food, health, and of course the emerging space sector. So there's some of the areas we're really focusing on, in addition to navigating our way through the change in bushfires, climate change issues, environmental issues, and all of the other important work that we do, as well as wrestling COVID-19 to the ground.
Indeed, and I'll ask you now in that context. I've got some more questions about staffing, but I wanted to drill down into a statement from the Minister for Industry. I've got that statement here if you want it. And I can... it might not need the context of this statement, but sometimes the government demands it. But I think in this case, you'll understand that the Ministry for Industry recently stated that CSIRO had been asked to determine the capability of CSL to manufacture COVID vaccines.
Yes, Senator. We've been working with CSL for many years and collaborating with them on various projects and ideas over that period. We have been engaging with CSL in regard to that work and collaborating with them. We've had, at the time, back in late August, in particular, the work that was going on in relation to CSL considering its ability to undertake a number of vaccine manufacturing activities at the one time. So we worked with them to actually look at their planning, make sure that we were considering all options with them, basically, helping them critique what they were going to be doing. And, we have obviously access to a number of technical experts that can do that with them in that regard. Noting, of course, that, CSL is an iconic Australian company with global
Indeed,
reach in that regard. So that collaboration's been going extremely well. We're continuing to work with CSL, and in fact, we're actually seconding some of our staff to CSL to assist on the manufacturing floor, for want of better language, with them at the moment, and we'll continue to do that, particularly if we have, if CSL is successful with the vaccines that are under development.
So, in that context, have you been auditing CSL to helps assure CSIRO and CSL that they're in a position to manufacture vaccines? What process have you been through?
Basically continuing to work together to make sure that the planning work that's going on is as well developed as possible, and keeping in contact. We have a good relationship with CSL. And I'm pleased to say we're trusted. Or
I'm sure on one hand you've got scientific
regard.
And technical work, but are you part of the quality assurance process to see if this is possible?
It might be easier. Senator, I'm going to use the UQ vaccine because it's a very tangible example.
Yeah.
When a university invents a vaccine candidate, it's a microscopic quantity. It can't really be used. So we had already scaled up the UQ candidate at our facility in Clayton, and CSL was depending on that ability to scale up so that they could figure out how to manufacture the UQ vaccine. And we'd worked extensively with them on that piece of work. There's a similar issue that they have to deal with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is quite far ahead of the UQ. And so they wanted to leverage that facility, those people, and our joint experience to see whether there was a way we could get there faster. And CSL, by the way, is actually going to try and manufacture both vaccines, and anything that we can do to help them do that more efficiently will only speed up the time to get a successful vaccine, and that's the reason we're doing it.
Excellent. I think that answers my second question, which was CSIRO's specific involvement in relation to the development and manufacture of the vaccine. What are you able to tell us about the prospects of how that process is going?
So I'm not sure what we're technically
the whole world's looking for the panacea of a successful vaccine, and I'm very glad to see that CSIRO and CSL are well down the path of making this viable. There's trials and there's all sorts of things to do before it's firmed up. So I'm really just interested in, I know science is not about optimism, but you always also have to have your eye on the ball in terms of a goal, because science is also about that inspiration and pursuit of that goal. What are your thoughts about the prospect of a CSL vaccine?
Senator, it might be easier to sort of... So we talk with the AstraZeneca people fairly frequently, as we do with our peers around the world. They're, I think, on the record actually that they're coming close to the end of their phase 3 clinical trial, which is a very big milestone.
Yeah.
Once they have actually completed that trial, I think the prospects become quite good, because so far there don't appear to have been significant events. Now there'll be some follow-up needed beyond that, and the regulatory agency in the UK will want to do that follow-up, but it is a significant milestone. So it might be more appropriate if we answer that question maybe in February estimates.
No, and can I also ask, I know this is a particular vaccine candidate, but clearly not all candidates will come through globally. This vaccine could get put aside for an alternative vaccine from overseas, or the CSL vaccine, could be the one that goes overseas. Can I ask, in terms of that manufacturing and capacity, can it be converted to vaccines from other sources, and how easily could that be done?
So, Senator...
So you have to buy the intellectual property after there's a successful licensing arrangement.
Just to clarify, Senator, CSL is looking at making both vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the UQ vaccine.
Yeah.
AstraZeneca is quite a long way ahead, so it's likely that we'll know about that one soon. And provided there are no adverse events, which there haven't been to date, then CSL will start to manufacture that vaccine as soon as they're actually allowed to. And so that's one path, but equally they're setting up to be able to manufacture the UQ vaccine once it's gone through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then ultimately phase 4 human trials. So they're trying to do both.
And Senator, just to add to that, so AstraZeneca has manufacturing plants for the Oxford vaccine around other areas around the world as well. So CSL will be manufacturing here in Australia for Australia and potentially the local region. But it will be doing that with others, and it will be licensing the technology from AstraZeneca for that. In the same way that the UQ vaccine, if it's successful, they're already working side by side with CSL as well. But what you might see is that one is actually successful before the other, or you might find that there are other vaccines from other being developed in other countries that are actually successful before those in turn as well.
Yeah. Could I ask, and excuse my ignorance on this, does CSL or anywhere else in Australia manufacture vaccines here, or are they all manufactured overseas currently?
So there's a bit of both, Senator. And there are different platforms, protein platforms, DNA platforms. Generally, CSL is the protein-based platform.
Largely, Senator, with trying to sort of keep it simple, there's roughly 4 vaccine types. We make, CSL makes here the protein type vaccines. It's also working on some antiviral work.
Yeah.
But the others are generally, one of the other types is made offshore around the world, and a 4th one is actually not made at commercial scale anywhere in the world. So there are challenges for everybody. I was
really just looking at, how this relates to our industry capability, not just in COVID, but then, linking it more broadly.
So interestingly on that, Senator, there's a number of smaller Australian companies that if you put them together, if they join together, between them it's possible that they could make one of the other types of vaccines, and we've been exploring that with them to see whether there's innovation we can help them with to make that possible.
Can I ask if the vaccines have been trialled on people over the age of 65?
Senator, the different groupings that are being used would be questions that would need to be put specifically to each of the vaccine developers. So I think that's me saying it would depend on who you're talking about, and we'd need to seek further advice. That's commercially
I'm
confidence.
assuming, though, that, as I understand it, the Secretary of Health has said people over 65 may not get it. I'm assuming, though, that the bioethical oversight has to have a look at how the vaccines have been ethically trialled on different cohorts of people. Is that something CSIRO has been involved in?
No, Senator, we're not involved in the clinical trials aspects. That being said, generally the way the process works is that they need to have tested it on enough people in those various categories to be able to get approval to then use the vaccine in those groups. So you'll find that they'll be breaking those clinical trials down into different groups.
Have you given any advice about ensuring that, you know, if people over 65 are the most vulnerable in the community, can there be more work done to ensure that a vaccine is available to them? You know, they're still fundamentally scientific questions because they're epidemiological, and I understand CSIRO won't be invested in all of them, all of the scientific questions, but I'm interested if you've got any information in terms of CSIRO's work about which cohorts of people a vaccine could be available to.
So in the first instance, Senator, it's probably more likely that they'll be available to those that are less vulnerable, noting that the benefits from vaccinating those that are will flow on in relation to that. But yes, you're trying to actually check safety and efficacy through those clinical trials, and then you subsequently, as a result of that, understand how effective the vaccine will ultimately be. But you need to do that cautiously. And at the moment, you'll find that the groups that will be a vaccine might be ready for in the first instance, noting I'm surmising, but it will be those that are possibly the less vulnerable to start with. But that will be good for health workers as well.
Okay, so we don't know if there's been ethics approval for a vaccine trial on over 65s, but we can try and find out.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Senator? Dr. Marshall, thank you for your evidence this afternoon. I heard you beginning to give an answer or give us a little bit of information about another type of vaccine that might be developed. I understand from the evidence, if I've been listening carefully, CSL are showing the capability to deliver protein-based vaccine and antiviral-based vaccine. Is that correct? Was that your evidence?
Antivirals are to deal with the effects. They're not a vaccine. They're to deal with, to make you feel better, to help you cope with the disease once you have it.
Okay, and then you said there was another kind that was being made offshore, and I think sorry, how do I pronounce your surname correctly?
Zilke.
Zilke, thank you very much. That there's no commercial capacity for the fourth type, but you said there were other collaborations that you thought might be underway in terms of vaccine development. Is that correct?
Yeah, so exactly. So on the extremes, the protein type is made here by CSL. On the other extreme, which is the mRNA isn't made anywhere in the world. And then there's a couple in between that a number of companies, if they collaborated together, might be able to do something there, and that's what we've been exploring. As you can understand, Senator, we're trying to figure out as many possible options here to get us to a vaccine as quickly as possible.
Okay, and it's your agency, it's the CSIRO that's been charged with undertaking this investigation for
Well, it's a
industrial capacity?
It's a collaboration between us, Department of Industry, Department of Health. A number of us are working together, Senator. It's not just CSIRO.
Senator, I might just, sorry, hello.
I was going.
I'll just
Where did
add
that
from
movie was
from the department's perspective. Yeah, so the government a couple of months ago did an RFI, put out an RFI on potential domestic manufacturing capability in this area that we're talking about, and the sort of results of that RFI, along with the input from the likes of CSIRO and others, are informing kind of government on the various vaccine options and opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Rice advised me she's got a time pressure to get to another committee and has a block of questions to ask here. Is it a good time to interrupt?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Senator Rice, you have the call.
Great, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for accommodating my timing. Good to see you again, even if it's virtually. Dr. Marshall, Dr. Mayfield, Dr. Zielke. Look, I want to start with the work that CSIRO have done on methane leakage from coal seam gas wells, study that was completed in mid-last year. Can you just tell me, because I wasn't able to find the statistic, and I wonder whether you've got it to hand, of how many coal seam gas wells there are in the country at the moment?
Senator, could I just get you to repeat that question? Thank you. It's just coming up to the table and I couldn't quite hear it.
Right. How many coal seam gas wells there are in Australia currently?
Oh, Senator, I couldn't answer that question. I have to take that on notice.
All right. I mean, the only stat that I could come up with easily myself was that there were 1,634 in Queensland in 2014, and I understand there are considerably more now. So look, what I wanted to know is, given how significantly our coal seam gas production has expanded in recent years, do you think that the CSIRO's work in investigating only 43 wells, which, you know, if it was just those Queensland wells, would be only just over 2% of the wells, do you think it gives us an accurate picture of the emissions from unconventional gas?
So, Senator, I think, yes, with the work that you refer to, I guess it was a study to start to try and get some sort of benchmarking. So the sample size we thought was adequate to start that work. And obviously there's opportunity for ongoing measurements into the future, but at this stage that's the work that we've done.
So you think a sample size of 1 to 2% is acceptable?
It provides I guess a baseline for us to understand what the potential level of emissions are and the variability. Yeah, so as a starting point, we thought it was adequate. Yeah.
Okay. And you know, are there plans to do more research and to survey more gas wells?
So as you know, Senator, that work gets done through our CSIRO activities, which is I guess a partnership with industry, community, other research organisations. So the actual projects that are commissioned by the CSIRO program really comes through the various regional research committees. So it would come through them asking for more work to be done. CSIRO itself, just through the governance model, can't commission that work in our own right.
So do you know whether there's any intent from CSIRO to commission more work? It would be significant given that CSIRO's name is on this research.
So I'm personally not aware of any additional work being planned at this stage. There have been a number of other studies looking at the full life cycle of emissions through the CSG LNG train. So there's been other work done on fugitives, but in terms of doing additional work just on wellheads and things like that, there's nothing I'm aware of that's planned.
Okay. With the study that was done, how did CSIRO choose the size and scope of the survey? Given, as you say, and I'm concerned that it is funded by gas companies and gas industry members. What role did CSIRO have in choosing the gas wells of the survey, that small sample?
So just at a general level there, Senator, obviously there's a question that's usually put forward by one of the regional research advisory committees, and CSIRO puts forward a proposal as to how we think we can address that, and that goes through then a review process and refinement process to arrive at a final project scope that then the regional committee is comfortable to then allocate funds to. Okay, so CSIRO was, you were happy with the way that those 43 wells were chosen? So that project, I guess its genesis was along in accordance with the governance process and done as per other projects. So we're comfortable that it was done independently and effectively. Okay. And so you were confident then in saying that Australia's gas fields leak less than the US, as your website does, given that you say that all you've got at the moment is a baseline sample and there's a need for more research? In terms of the measurements we've taken, which we think provides a reasonable sample of Australian operations, we're very comfortable with the number that was arrived at. Yeah, so we found majority of wells were very well maintained, and there was not many legacy wells. The comparison you'd probably like to make would be to the US, where there's a lot of legacy wells that have been abandoned. Australia doesn't have that issue. But those 43 wells were basically chosen by the gas company, weren't they? No, I think the project team would have specified the sort of wells that they'd like to look at, and then you have it's a matter of negotiation in terms of practical things such as access. But the project team would have specified the sort of locations that they'd like to look at. We know that when gas wells leak above 3% of production, that gas then becomes more polluting than coal. And 3 major studies in the US have showed average leakage rates of between 2.3 and 3.7%. So how confident are you, given that small sample size, that Australia's wells, this isn't where Australia's wells are as well? So another part of the CSIRO program, one of the other measurement programs that was undertaken was what we would view as more of a top-down measurement. We're using flux towers to look at various emissions as opposed to going to individual wells, and using that technology, which was used for a range of different other measurements, it suggested that the numbers from the bottom-up exercise were quite valid. So we've got reasonable confidence, yes. Is there consideration being given to the use of methane detecting drones, as is being done in the US? Where, I mean, BP had wells that were leaking greater than 3% and they used the drones, and now their leakage rate's less than 0.2%. Can you just repeat that? It's a little bit difficult. Drones. The use of drones to detect methane leakage, which is happening in the US, so that where they have got wells that are leaking at a high rate, that they are able to then address that. Is that work being done here in Australia? Is CSIRO investing in those technologies? Senator, I'm probably not able to answer that accurately at this stage. I can find out for you. Obviously, there's efficiencies by using drones. You can cover more territory and you can do that remotely, but I don't know the specific answer at this stage. Okay. A question for the Minister. Minister, will you commit to having the government to fund more research on leakage rates?
Oh, look, I'd have to take that question on notice.
Do you think it's important?
Oh, look, I wouldn't offer a particular opinion, but I'd be happy for the Minister to on notice. Okay. I mean, it's a huge concern, given that we've got a study of only 43 wells out of, it's only around less than 2% of the total wells in the country. A study that was, as you say, is actually run by the gas industry, and it makes gas, if there's leakage of greater than 3%, it makes gas more polluting than coal. So it's a huge concern. Okay, look, I want to move on to green hydrogen. And Dr. Marshall, I want to talk to you about the letter that you got from the Greens leader, Adam Bant, who wrote to you on the 9th of September in relation to your costings of green hydrogen. And he presented evidence that your projected best case 2025 prices for green hydrogen, which were included in your national hydrogen roadmap, were already out of date and were being achieved by real-world contracts today, which is great news. And in your response, you wrote, "It is true that the global energy sector has changed considerably since the National Hydrogen Roadmap was published in August 2018. We're currently working on updating our energy cost models and continue to monitor changes in costs with advancement of new hydrogen projects and installations." So my question is, when will those updated energy cost models be completed?
Senator, maybe I can answer that question for you. So in terms of the letter that you refer to, I think the specific inquiry was around the cost of electrolysers, capital cost of electrolysers, which is one of the significant costs.
Which is a big factor in how much green hydrogen costs.
So as you'd appreciate, when you're doing modelling and costing work, there are a range of different ways of doing that. But the firmest numbers that you get with that is when you actually have actual installations where they've been tendered for, constructed, built, and you understand the costs and the balance of plant costs. So in terms of our databases, we try to make sure that we've done the due diligence on the particular numbers that are coming through to make sure that we understand that they're robust, they actually represent the whole costs of such an installation, and we can then apply them. So it really depends on when new information comes to hand and how we can do that due diligence. So it's an ongoing process. It's always happening. And in terms of it being published, we tend to do that through our Gen Cost work quite often, and that is coming out about every 1 to 2 years.
So in terms of updating that August 2018 costs, where you say that the real world situation is much better than a prediction, and we've now got real world projects that are cheaper than your 2025 predictions. So when will you release new costs that take into account what's happening in the real world now?
So in terms of the Gen Cost process, Senator, it's currently in a consultation period where the next version of that is being drafted, and it's being consulted with industry and others to confirm its veracity. In terms of the numbers that you're referring to, I guess we're still working through to ensure that they actually are not announcements, but they're actual installations, and it's always important to sort of dig between that, because there's a lot of announcements, but a lot of those plants are never built, and it's important that we don't use those numbers. They've really got to be based on numbers where plants are actually built.
You've acknowledged, though, that the price has come down. So in terms of going back to that timeline, though, of when your updated costs through the Gen Cost process are going to be released, so they're in consultation. So what is your timeline as to when that is expected?
In terms of Gen Cost, I think it's early in the new year is when the next version comes out. I'll have to confirm that for you, Senator.
Okay, that's good to know. Because, are you concerned that given the changes in costs, and basically that your 2018 paper, which is out of date, and which, and basically the conclusion from that paper was that hydrogen derived from fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage would be cheaper than renewable hydrogen in 2025. Are you concerned that that is currently being used to justify support for fossil fuel derived hydrogen with carbon capture and storage rather than green hydrogen?
So, Senator, in terms of the timelines for some of these decisions being made and the pathways, I think the evolution of the costs over a period of 6 to 12 months is probably quite short term compared to what's required. So I'm comfortable that industry is getting the right data by which they can make its decisions. and obviously then engage with engineering companies and suppliers and vendors. So they'll be able to get direct information from vendors as well as they start to build. So I don't think it's holding hydrogen back at this point.
No, but it's in terms of comparison of blue hydrogen, fossil fuel derived hydrogen with green hydrogen, your national hydrogen roadmap is being used to justify fossil fuel derived hydrogen. I mean, have you provided, for example, advice to the chief scientist or the hydrogen strategy group about the change in the cost profile and how your hydrogen roadmap is now out of date and the need for updated energy cost models for both blue and green hydrogen? So,
Senator, we're updating the information when we can and providing it through, and there are other sources for some of this data as well. But I believe people understand that there is a decreasing cost curve there for electrolysers, so they're working on that basis.
But what advice have you provided advice to the chief scientist and the hydrogen strategy group?
So we participated in the hydrogen strategy work and as part of the hydrogen reference group. So we provided our best information available at the time into that work, and there was a number of other organisations and players there who understand. So including electrolyser vendors who make the actual equipment.
So has that been recent? Can you tell me when you provided that advice?
So in terms of the hydrogen strategy and roadmap work, that was last year.
No, so since the roadmap work, as we're talking about, things have changed since the roadmap. Have you provided any updated advice since the roadmap?
Senator, I think any large project, given the magnitude of the investment, would do its own diligence projecting forward as to the value or premium.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Marshall, but I'm running out of time. What I want to know is whether CSIRO, since the hydrogen roadmap, has provided any advice to the chief scientist or the hydrogen strategy group. Yes or no?
So when we engage with the chief scientist, we provide him with the most up-to-date figures that we've got, whether they're published or not. So we would have provided our most recent figures to chief scientists when last requested. I don't have a timeline of when that would have occurred, but...
Okay, can you take that on notice then, please, and to what advice you provided the chief scientists on hydrogen costs? And similarly, what advice, if any, have you provided to the minister about the need for updated energy costs to compare blue and green hydrogen? So in terms of providing information to the minister, we've made our roadmaps and our gen cost reports available. So our published information has been made available. Yes, but anything else? Because Dr. Mayfield, the whole point of this is that things have changed since your roadmap, and you have acknowledged that in your letter to Mr. Bant, and that the cost of green hydrogen has come down. So have you provided advice to the minister about that reduction in costs since the roadmap? I'm not aware of any specific advice around electrolyser costs that we provided to the minister. Thank you. And have you provided any advice to the department? In terms of through the department, we provide advice around hydrogen through the LETS work that's been done. So we would have provided information on our costs there as well. Okay. Can you take on notice as to when and what advice you provided to the department, please? Yes, we can.
Senator Rice, I might just add an additional question on notice, which is, can you provide advice to myself and perhaps Senator Rice on notice about the manner in which the cost of renewable hydrogen has come down and any data to support that? Thank you.
And can I request that basically that given that the costs have come down, that CSIRO urgently take on the need to have briefings with all those entities and the relevant ministers before we head down the path of spending billions of dollars on fossil fuel derived carbon fossil fuel derived hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, which would be such an outdated and expensive technology for Australia to invest in, and it's the direction the government's currently going in.
And Senator, you'd understand also that the current scale of electrolyser technology is quite small, and a big part of it bringing its cost structure down is to scale it up. So projects are required to scale it up. So that's the process that it has to go through. The timing which it happens comes down to the success of each of those projects. And there's such potential for hydrogen. We all agree, but green hydrogen
which is coming down in cost. It's going to be crazy to send us down a dead end road of investing billions in fossil fuel derived hydrogen when green hydrogen is already cheaper than what you're estimating in 2025. I need to move on. I'm going to run out of time with all the other things.
Senator Rice, I was just about to let you know that I've got to go to Senator Patrick and back to Senator Pratt as well. So when you're ready.
Okay. All right. So how much longer have I got then, Chair?
I mean, I would love it if you could do it in 5 minutes.
All right. Look, I just wanted to follow up one question about the staffing cap which has been lifted and wondering whether how this now is going to impact on the staff that you have employed under labour hire contracts. I mean, you told me in February that you had 263 people engaged under labour hire agencies. Are you going to end all of those labour hire contract positions, particularly the scientists who are employed under them? I think there were 19 science-related positions, 53 IT positions.
So, Senator, as I mentioned earlier, we expect that our recruitment strategies will remain the same going forward. That being said, depending on what work we are doing, what projects we are doing, for what periods of time, will inform whether we take people on permanently or whether we take them on a temporary basis or whether we use labour hire. So I'm sorry, it depends is the answer to that one. I know that's not what you're looking for, but we don't expect we'll change our strategies.
So you think it's still appropriate to employ scientists under labour hire contracts?
Well, it's unusual for that to occur even under our current arrangements. We only have one or two, I think.
Anyway, okay. Can you take on notice whether those labour hire, the number of people that are employed under labour hire contracts, and update that since February? Okay.
I had an additional question on that, which was, will they be converted to ASL positions, and if any of them will be?
Okay, we'll take that on notice then.
Can I now go to the budget, and you, Dr. Marshall, in your opening statement, you acknowledged the extra $459.2 billion over 4 years. Look, I've been looking at the budget papers, and is it correct to say that that's actually not even going to cover what you expect to lose from external revenue because of the decline in external revenue due to COVID?
No, Senator, I think it's a good safety net for the potential loss of external revenue, but I couldn't blame you for reaching the wrong conclusion by looking at the budget papers, and be happy to walk you through that if it would be helpful.
Look, I've compared last year's budget estimates with this year's budget estimates, and there seems to be a difference of, this year 157 million, next year 140 million, year after 140 million. And basically, even your external revenue forecast for 2023-24 is less than it was last year.
So, Senator, we were projecting continued growth of external revenue. If you simply fall back to the revenue we delivered last year, which was a little over 500 million, we think that will fall back by up to 100 million from that point. And the budget money would cover that 100 million shortfall. At 500, at what we delivered last year for revenue, we have enough income, enough funding and revenue to support the people that we have.
But are you saying that the forecasts in the budget this year aren't accurate?
No, Senator, previously we forecast continued revenue growth prior to COVID. Obviously that revenue growth isn't going to happen. But if you fall back to the revenue we actually delivered last financial year, which was 510, 514 or something, we expect that to drop by up to 100 million. And if it did that, the budget money would easily cover that gap. And at that level, the level of revenue we delivered last year is more than enough to support all of the people we have currently.
So basically, it's all right. It's because you're not growing.
Exactly.
It's covering.
And sorry, Senator, I knew where you were going. I was just trying to help you get there. I had the same challenge when I read the budget papers, by the way.
Okay. Look, my final question then is, I just want to go back to, you talked about bushfires and the work that CSIRO is doing on what the impact of the expected changes in fire intensity, frequency, extent under the level of warming that we are currently on track for. And the Bureau of Meteorology this week have absolutely reinforced that we are currently on track for 3.4 to 4.4 degrees of warming of global heating by the end of the century. What work is CSIRO doing to articulate what that means for fire danger?
Certainly, Senator. Wallo, do you want to do that one?
So Senator, so obviously there's some work that was done around 2007. It was looking at, I guess, the role of extreme fire weather and climate change.
That was a long time.
So, and it predicted some the increases. Obviously, we continue to monitor what's going on through our state of the climate work and other areas. Our biggest focus currently with bushfire work is really around trying to build resilience in that sort of space. So it's with doing post-fire analyses, providing tools to help with fighting fires.
Is CSIRO doing any work at all, in combination with the CRC, on articulating in detail what the impact of 4 degrees of global heating is going to be on fires? I asked a question on notice about this through our Bushfires Select Committee, that I got an answer back that there was an expected 20% increase in dangerous fire weather with every degree of warming. So, which, you span that out and it means you hardly have a day in extreme hot years that won't have dangerous fire weather.
That'll have to be the last question.
Yeah, but can you confirm for me then, which is extremely worrying, that you are not specifically doing any focused research on that issue?
So, Senator, at this stage, I guess it's fair to say that we will have information in the forthcoming State of the Climate, which gives the measurements, giving a sense of how it's changing. But as I said before, probably our current focus is more around how do we address the issues arising from that increase in fire weather as opposed to predicting where it goes forward at this point in time.
I just find that extraordinary, given that we are on track for 4 degrees of warming. The impact of fires on the Australian environment and the Australian people under that level of warming is just mind-bogglingly awful. And you're not doing the research on it. Our chief science agency is not doing the detailed research that needs to be done. I'm astounded and shocked.
Senator, I think it's fair to say that it's quite accepted that there is an increase in extreme fire weather and also an increase in length of fire seasons. That's a given.
It's very clear from the information I've got back from the Bureau of Meteorology that there is a need for more research to actually articulate what does fire look like in the Australian environment under 3 to 4 to more degrees of warming, which is what we are currently headed for.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Ross. I think you've made your
Thank
point
you.
clear.
Thanks, Chair.
Senator Patrick, I'll go to you next, and then Senator Pratt.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to, if there's anyone that's familiar with this Bushfire Earth Observation Task Force report that CSIRO had some involvement in around the NovaSAR satellites. Someone volunteering themselves?
Yep, we can help you with that, Senator. NovaStar's a bit of an Australian first. It's a satellite that can uniquely see through smoke and see at night to help us better with disaster management in difficult conditions.
Sure, but it's not Australian owned, is it?
No, we own about 10% of it. It's a British satellite.
That's what I thought. This report, I'm just wondering, are you familiar with the report? Bushfire Earth Observation Task Force, the Space Agency report, but you had some involvement in it.
We helped them with it, so not intimately familiar, Senator, but let's see where we go and we'll answer.
Okay, I was just wondering if there had been any feedback in respect of the Space Agency back to you and, from your input.
Yeah, unfortunately, certainly aware of the report, Senator, but in terms of the specifics, that's really being handled by one of my colleagues, so I'm not across the detail.
Is there any follow-up work to progress from this particular report?
I think at a high level there's an expectation to try and make the case for more of that sort of work to be done in terms of access to satellite time and the use of those satellites, making them sort of useful tools in future fire seasons, but I couldn't talk to you on the specifics.
Okay. Okay, just generally with CSIRO then for 2020, 2021, what work are you doing on bushfire-related activities?
So in terms of our current body of work, obviously we're doing work on post-fire analysis to understand the impact of fires on the ground, and that then leads into the work we do around improving building codes. We also do work around modelling of fire spread and rate of spread, and that's done through our Spark platform, which we're currently in discussion with AFAC around how we can put that in place as the next generation fire prediction tool. So there's a range of work getting done along those lines. We're working with traditional owners around cultural burning, understanding that better and how it might be applied, as are all the fire agencies. They have a strong engagement there as well.
So are these buried in other PBS items?
In terms of...
these activities, are they,
so,
in terms of the funding for them, are they like, I don't mean buried in a bad sense, just not overtly pulled out as line items?
So a lot of these pieces of work are being done with end users such as RFS in New South Wales and AFAC, which is the Australasian Fire Association. Working through them. We also expect that the new bushfire centre, which is currently being developed, that will also take on some of that work, but that's not created. That will happen in the middle of next year. Those are the sort of mechanisms by which we're working.
Does that mean that they fund you for a particular activity? Is that how it works?
Yes. Once that comes together, that would be effectively a funding body that looks at what are the problems to deal with, identifies the ones they want to do work on, and then collaborative work would take place from a range of providers.
All right, can I get you perhaps on notice to go and have a look at how much you think you're going to spend on bushfire support and related activities for this financial year?
Senator, currently across CSIRO we would spend about $6.5 million per annum on bushfire work and use about 74 FTE. That's our current spend.
Okay. Now, this particular report, as you have suggested, Dr. Marshall, talks about the Nova SAR and the fact that it is only 10% owned by Australia, and therefore it has limited coverage, or you've got limited access to it. Is that a fair
Senator,
summary of the situation?
CSIRO built with GA a thing called Sentinel hotspots, which are satellites that spot fire starts and then direct the firefighters to the spot to try and contain the fire before it gets out of control. One of the drawbacks of Sentinel is it can't always see through smoke or everything at night, whereas NovaSAR can augment that capability and make it better. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to use both capabilities to give us more capability to stop fires earlier.
Okay, I'm going to make a political statement, but it provides context for the next question. And I've had difficulty seeing vision from the current government. They're sort of managers, not necessarily leaders. And you don't have to comment about that, but it just seems to me we've got a space industry that we're trying to grow. We've got people that are working on launch, CubeSats, a whole range of different things, and it seems to me like this appears to be quite a successful program, a very useful program. I just wonder whether or not in any of the conversations you've had, whether we've talked about having perhaps a national satellite constellation ourselves that could assist with bushfire management real time and all those sorts of things.
Senator, we spend a lot of time on the ground with the firefighters. You don't see us, but CSIRO people have been out pretty much at every fire since Ash Wednesday because obviously that's how we learn. But the firefighters use our predictive model to try and anticipate the fire behaviour, and that helps them fight it more effectively. What they would
So it
say...
takes some weather inputs and some
Exactly.
ground data and says...
Is the fire going to jump the river or not, or should we hazard reduction burn here or back? What they would say if they were here is the big challenge for them is not so much the fire start, which I think we do quite a good job of spotting. It's getting there, because the terrain, when fire's started by a lightning strike, that can happen high in the mountains where there are no roads. The real challenge is getting the firefighters to the location quickly enough so that they can contain the blaze. And that's a real challance. That's why we collaborate with...
I know we employ, and I've actually recalled being down at RAP Edinburgh at one stage, conducting a training course on acoustics before I was a senator, and my whole class got taken out because of bushfires to operate P3s, providing real-time aerial support. And I wonder whether or not there's some capability that satellites can perform in that area, almost providing a real-time coverage across Australia.
So as I said, Sentinel does give you that. It's not perfect, but it's a great tool. We could make it better.
That's just the start. You're saying that's the start.
If you were choosing, a firefighter would tell you, help us get to the location quicker, rather than because we can figure out where it is, but how do we get there?
Yeah,
that's
so you're saying
challenge.
that's the low-hanging fruit that if you could solve that, well, not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but that's the area you might target if you could.
Yeah, because generally speaking, if you can get to fire, if it hasn't been hazard reduction burned to lower the risk, then you have about 20 minutes to get there before it's out of control. If it has been hazard reduction burned, 20 minutes turns into an hour.
Yeah.
So hazard reduction burning, better transport to get the firefighters there. And of course, we do a lot of work on protective equipment to keep, because there's almost always a burnover risk as well. So we do a lot of materials development for the fire agencies to actually protect the firefighters if that happens. But they're the practical kind of challenges that they're dealing with.
So remember, on a submarine, our rule was get the fire out within a minute, otherwise you've got a big problem.
I spent about a week on a submarine once too, Senator, and
Well, you would have seen us
a big risk.
all attending to fires in our undies and whatever we had on as we climbed out of bed. But,
That's quite a sight.
No, that was when I was young and handsome, okay, so I don't mean to disturb the committee, and I think I've finished. Not about the last...
Just in terms of trying to get to the fire, there is some debate about having aerial capacity to get there quickly. Has that figured in your considerations as well? Have you done modelling about what would happen if we had a fleet that was available to us?
Senator, that's more a matter for the fire agencies themselves. I was just reflecting what they've told us.
So getting to the fire is getting capacity to put the fire out, really, whether that's people with hoses or other technologies, or whether it's a fly-in dump.
Or retardant, yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's the time factor there that you think is... Thank you. That's quite helpful.
Thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've just got a couple of quick questions, please, about CSIRO's own source income, which I understand is external revenue from industry in the main. I note that it's reduced by $154 million, or 25%, this financial year compared to last. Can I ask what the major contributor to the loss of that revenue is, please, Dr. Marshall?
Yeah, primarily the impacts of COVID, Senator, and just for clarity, we forecast our revenue forward across the estimates. It's obviously difficult to do that in normal times, because if you take away the 300 odd million of our budget that we spend on collaborative infrastructure for universities to use, then roughly half of our funding comes externally and half comes from appropriate. So it's a big impact on the organisation, and that half that's from external varies depending on the market. With the recession following COVID globally, there's a lot of uncertainty, even more than normal, about what the revenue will be. So far, we haven't seen as big a fall-off in revenue as we thought. We have seen some, but we think the real impact of the recession hasn't quite hit yet, because there are a number of supports around the world to kind of keep their economies going, and that won't last forever.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree, and wanted to ask you about that. Which sectors and industries are you expecting to see this biggest decline in partnership investment?
Yeah, so as a general rule, Senator, the hardware type partnerships that we have, we do a lot of work, for example, with companies like Boeing to make air travel safer, more environmentally friendly, that sort of thing. The work we do in manufacturing, anything involving hard goods and hands-on tends to be more at risk. And then obviously the digital work that we do, a lot of companies have not only not been that impacted because their work is digital, some of them have actually flourished because of the crisis. And so in rare cases, we've seen increases in revenue. But that's a general case. And then in the Australian context, the impacts, I think, have been slower to manifest than they have elsewhere in the world. Roughly 20% of CSIRO's external revenue comes from global companies, Microsoft, Boeing and so on, Google. And the global slowdown has been faster than the domestic slowdown.
Is some of it contracted and locked in, or is it all flexible, or does that vary?
Yeah, most of our contracts are shorter term.
Yeah.
And of course, in a pandemic, it's difficult to enforce contracts.
Okay, and are there projects at risk as a whole? How do you maintain your? How do people maintain their jobs at CSIRO, but also the expertise and knowledge if there are particular sectors like manufacturing or hardwoods or air travel that are impacted?
Yeah, so
how are you managing that?
Yeah, for the last 4 years, we've managed our minerals business unit through a more than 50% contraction of the minerals industry. So it's comparable to what could happen with COVID. And yet we managed to navigate that business unit through and back into a growth mode. So that sort of 3 to 4 year period generally is enough time to navigate through a major disruption like that. We've never had to do it across all 10 of our business units before.
And you are doing that almost now.
But this budget safety net does carry us for 4 years, which, as I said, is generally enough time to navigate through a major disruption.
Okay. Can I ask, you've characterised the research and development declining business investment in the economy overall. Do you have long-term concerns about that? Are there other things government should be doing to boost private investment into research and development? How do we incentivise that so that we can keep your great partnerships that have so many dividends going?
Yeah, Senator, we were fortunate enough last year to do this piece of work, the Australian National Outlook. And we did it a bit differently. We did it with 25 companies and about close to 50 leaders from across Australia to try and show how science could navigate a path to prosperity for Australian industry and society. And it's been surprising to us, but organisations like NAB have actually made massive commitments based on this plan. So in NAB's case, it was a couple of $2 billion towards small business to help them grow through innovation, which is one of the major themes of this report. So, historically, Australian business has been reluctant to invest in science and technology.
Yeah.
We're seeing a shift. We were seeing a shift before COVID, but COVID, I think, has been the wake-up call that we really do have to be more innovative in what we do, and we have to do more things here in our own country rather than let them go offshore.
And do you think that will be enough to arrest declining? You're saying you're seeing signs of optimism, but the reality is that Australia's R&D investment has declined coming from business. Do we need to pull specifically some of those levers to return that to a growth setting?
We're testing that at the moment with our missions program, Senator. So the missions really targeted very specific roadblocks to Australia's success. And it's been surprising to me how many companies, a number of government departments as well, have strongly stepped into those missions. But it surprised me how many companies, big companies like BHP and Microsoft, have leaned in to want to support them, either through direct funding or through resources. If that continues on that track, I'll probably continue to be optimistic about our future. Also, the government's manufacturing strategy, I think, is another sort of shot in the arm. And Senator, it's almost as if, industry is leaning in more, and then that's kind of making it easier for the government to see that industry is serious about making a shift. And I think that's a smart way for us to operate, because it's hard for us to know, what's real in industry and what isn't. But when industry steps up and makes serious funding commitments like they are, then I think it becomes easier then for us to work with them to support them.
Okay, can I just, lastly, do you follow, and in the context of that research, follow international comparisons in different policy settings to attract that investment?
We've done quite a lot of work with the NRC, which is our sister agency in Canada.
Yeah.
They've gone through an interesting journey over the last 20 years, Senator, where 20 years ago they looked a lot like us, and today almost 40% of Canadian companies do breakthrough innovation, new-to-world innovation. In Australia, it's 2%. So there's clearly some things we can learn from Canada, and a lot of our work, like the mission strategy, has come from what's worked for them.
Thank you for those insights. I'm done now, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. I believe Senator Davey has a couple of quick questions, and that will be it for CSIRO.
Thank you. Just a few questions, and I apologise that I couldn't get here earlier. I just want to better understand. We've got a lot of research and development corporations out there, and particularly in agriculture. And I want to understand what steps you take to ensure that the research and development work that you're doing, which is fundamental and really groundbreaking in most areas, but that it's not duplicating the work that's being done by the RDCs, but complementing.
Yes, Senator, generally the RDCs, so we have a very close relationship with them, and generally they contract with us. So they have very good visibility of what we're doing, and vice versa. So for example, when we did Future Feed, that was a collaboration with one of the RDCs, as an example. So I think there doesn't tend to be much duplication. The RDCs work with universities, they work with many research providers, but they work with us when they feel like we're going to have the best capability or be able to deliver most efficiently.
Yeah. And so then how are you linking your work in with the agriculture innovation agenda?
So a number of our missions are targeted directly at that agenda. Yeah. For example, Senator, there's an ambitious goal to grow our agri-food exports from 60 billion to 100 billion. We've done work that concerns us that many unique Australian products are being counterfeited internationally. And so we've done breakthrough science using the genetics of the product itself, for example, with meat or salmon, and even the unique isotopic concentration of the water in case of fruits and plants, so that you can use the product itself as a unique identifier to prove that it came from Australia, as opposed to a mark or a stamp that could be counterfeited. We think there's up to 10 billion that could be gained. So get us 10 billion closer to the 100 billion goal just by figuring out a better way to do food provenance. And a number of Australian companies from Tasmania to the Northern Territory have partnered with us to help us develop that solution. So that's one. We think there's another 10 billion to be gained through the plant-based protein industry by growing an alternative protein business. And the reason we worked with Hungry Jacks...
I appreciate that you called it plant-based protein rather than
the reason we wanted to explore with Hungry Jacks this idea is we're worried that it might be competitive with the beef industry, which we wouldn't want to do. But they've shown additive sales over their burgers because a lot of vegans want to try a burger but they don't eat meat. And so it really does genuinely seem to be an additive market. We think that could be a $10 billion injection for our exports in Asia. So that's another one. And then the other big one is drought. We're working with a number of small regional towns to try and figure out what can science do better to help them both predict drought using our climate modelling, but also using some of the technologies like Graincast that was in the media today that help them use science and modelling to make better decisions about how much fertiliser should I buy, how much seed should I buy, when exactly should I plant, what sort of crop yields can I expect, and it helps them optimise the profit from their business. We think there's significant upside there as well.
Yeah,
so I'd say we're very well aligned.
So I would imagine to do all of this as well, you're working closely with the Department of Agriculture to identify gaps and priorities and to work so that it's a practical solution for industry to achieve our target.
Yeah, exactly. And back in 2016, Senator, we put a number of our scientists from across the organisation literally out onto farms. So there's a great story about a young scientist in Hobart, Jackie Brown, who went out and came up with the idea for Graincast by working on the ground with a farming family. Brilliant climate scientists, but they helped her understand what did they really need to know from climate science to help make their farm more productive. And there are many of those stories across CSIRO. That's kind of where we're at our best, Senator. It's why in this crisis, having our scientists on the shop floor in factories, actually working with manufacturing people, I don't know, they love that environment because they can very quickly see an immediate impact from their work, particularly during a crisis. So I think we tend to be very practical for that reason, that we're out in the community, we're on the shop floor, on farms, we're not just stuck in labs.
And I asked you last time about your regional locations, and you very kindly gave me feedback and a list of where all of those regional locations are. Just during COVID, were any of those shut down and mothballed, or are they all still operational?
Mothballed wouldn't be the term, Senator. In general, we had to move about 70% of our people off sites to make it safe for the other 30% to actually be on, because a lot of what we do needs hardware.
Yep.
So we can't do that from home. I wouldn't say mothballed though. How would you describe it, Judy?
No, Senator. So basically we put in place arrangements whereby staff, if they needed to go in, whether they be feeding animals, whether they be checking laboratory work, those sorts of things, were able to do that. So we've not actually had any site around the country that's had to be closed as a result of it. We've had limited access on a number of occasions, of course, but no, we haven't had to mothball anything in that regard. Yeah.
Great. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Davey. If there are no further questions to the CSIRO, I thank you very much for your attendance and your evidence here this evening.